everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Just Football podcast. How are you guys? We are back, and it's nice to be on a show in 2021. We've had a few episodes last year, including many special guests in fields across the world of football. We've had managers, we've had scouts, we've had lawyers, we've had players. So, the aim of this podcast is to bring you a variety of insights and names across the world of football, people who are doing great work in different fields and sectors. And today it is a scouting special. We are bringing you coverage of the Under-21 European Championships, which kick off this week. I'm delighted to say we're going to be joined by Alexander Wilkinson, who is the UK scout for Heerenveen. Alexander, how are you this afternoon?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very well. So, the background for this podcast, of course, as I set the kind of topics for discussion today, we're going to talk about the Under-21 European Championships, of course. We're going to cover sort of 20 to 25 players to watch. So we're going to have a real look into who you need to keep an eye out for in this tournament. We'll talk a little bit about the format of the tournament and of course, run through some of the favourites. And then we'll have a little detailed discussion about some of the bigger nations maybe and players to look out for in this tournament. It's certainly going to be a tournament packed full of talent. We're going to look at the French squad, for example. We'll look at the England squad. We'll look at a couple of other nations as well. And of course, we're doing that in the company of someone who has a fantastic track record at scouting in football, Alexander. So you're going to be in good company on this podcast with someone who really knows their stuff. So firstly, a little bit of background in terms of the European Championships. On Just Football, we have previously been UEFA accredited to cover the tournament in the past. So as an example, I was in Czech Republic for the 2015 European Championships. My name's Jonathan Faduba, by the way, if you don't know. So I was out there covering that tournament, and Just Football's track record in general has always been focusing on youth football around the world. So it's a subject that's very close to our hearts. And of course, we've decided to bring you this podcast we've decided to bring you this coverage of this tournament in podcast form. Usually we obviously had it in written form, but this year we're going for a podcast preview show. So I'm hoping you're going to enjoy it. Firstly, let's talk about our guest, Alexander. It's fantastic to have you on the show. Of course, you have written for Just Football in the past. And as I say, you're an esteemed name in the game of scouting, and you've been doing it for a while now. So firstly, tell us, how you are today and how's the sort of last few months for you been from a scouting point of view?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Obviously, I've known you for quite a while now, and it's been a long time coming. But yeah, the last year especially, I think everyone would be lying if they said they hadn't noticed a huge change in the way that scouting in general works. I mean, I was getting to 2, 3, 4 games a week live, and now all of a sudden I've been to probably 4 or 5 within the last year. So it's a case of a lot now is the remote and the video analysis, and obviously the stats are becoming a lot heavier involved in a lot of the process and things now. So I think it's a case of those who hadn't already switched to more of a video process in the scouting are getting found out a little bit, and they're struggling as a result with their recruitment this year. So yeah, it's not been an easy year for anybody, obviously, because you can't get through everything that you want to get through. And in terms of my personal process, I like to get there nice and early to a game. I'll be there an hour before kickoff. I can watch the player walk out onto the pitch. I can see who they're talking to. I can see how they're interacting with the coaches and things in the warm-up and their attitude towards and things like that. But when you're having to watch a game via the video, you miss out on these key bits, and obviously you're dependent on the angle of the camera and what the camera usually follows the ball as well. So you can't get quite as much detail, but there is still a heck of a lot you can find out from the video footage. And obviously it gives you a broader knowledge as well, because I couldn't personally go and watch somebody in Australia or Uruguay or America with the click of my fingers, whereas I can just open my laptop and now I can watch anybody in the world. So it's unbelievable the way that it's changing. And like I say, those that weren't already doing that process are being found out now. So it's a tough year, and it's been a lot of adjustment for myself in terms of I was doing video work, but it was primarily live, and I've now gone pretty much video rather than live. Yeah. So yeah, it's adjusting.
Yeah, it's a challenging time for scouts in general. I mean, anyone who's listening and may not know about Alexander, of course, your accent sort of gives away the fact that you're maybe not Dutch in terms of your role for Heerenveen. So, you have a really interesting background and how you got into scouting and that kind of thing. Tell us how long you've been scouting and how you got into the role at Heerenveen, your process from going from where you began to where you are today.
Yeah, obviously. Obviously, I'm from the north of England, just outside of Leeds, for those who can't tell from the accent. It's not local Dutch, and it is an unorthodox way to get into the game. But my process was, as a boy, I was like many people, the dream was to be a professional football player. I didn't make it after numerous spells at academies at professional and semi-pro level. I didn't make the grade. Don't get me wrong, I was right not to make the grade, but at the same time, I completely fell out of love with the game by the age of 18. And I don't think I watched the game for 2-3 years, whether that was my own team Leeds or whether it was just going to a local game. I completely went away from football for a few years. And then it was one random Friday night, I got a phone call from a friend saying his local park team was short on the Saturday morning. Would I come and help out? Went and played 20 minutes, and the next thing I knew, I was hooked, and I realised I've got to be involved in football. It's as simple as that. And I initially went down the coaching route. I thought, all right, I've had decent experience as a junior. I know how to relay a message and how to improve people within the game. So I thought, right, let's go this route. I realised pretty quickly the coaching route wasn't something I enjoyed totally, and I found it more of a chore than a hobby. So it was actually speaking to a former academy coach of mine that suggested having a look at the scouting route. So I did some qualifications. I did the online FA courses. I did one through the PFSA as well. And then, it was around that sort of time that I'd put so much time and effort into this scouting work. I'd done 12, 18 months off my own back, going and watching local park football to the lowest semi-pro and lowest professional levels, and then under 23s in League One teams and Champions League. Basically just getting a big background of knowledge for myself and clear identification of what was required for each of the different steps and different levels, which was probably the best thing I ever did. Don't get me wrong, it cost me a fair bit of time and money to invest into myself. But at the same time, the knowledge I gained from that, not just the levels, but also you pick up on a few names that you wouldn't have necessarily looked for as well in terms of players themselves. And it was a tough process getting into the game. People who are looking to get into scouting or are in scouting will tell you the hardest thing for them was getting in. It's such a competitive market. Many people say, oh yeah, I want to be a scout. How do I do it? It's not as simple as just going, contact the club you're in. I spent probably another 12, 18 months. I contacted every single club, professional, in Europe, South America, North America, many in Asia, and the Oceania region. And out of all these clubs that I messaged, I think I may have got 10 responses, and the majority were just, oh, thank you for the message, but we can't help you out, I'm afraid. So it was a frustrating period, and obviously a lot of time spent, and then to just get knocked back like that. And the big thing that I learned from that was I was very generic with my approach. There wasn't anything that stood out for me. I was just doing like everybody else does that you see, and just saying, all right, he's a very good player, he's a very good player, he's a good player. They all know these. They're in the professional environment. So it was naive of me to think that I could just do that and get into a club. But then I began to analyse and assess specific teams and then pitching players that I knew from more niche regions. So for example, it was the Premier League 2, which didn't have any data or video footage available. You had to go and watch them live. It's as simple as that. So I knew many teams outside the UK weren't going to have access to these names. And I ended up pitching names to a few clubs that fit what they were looking for, what I felt. And it ended up being the case of one of the clubs that came back to me and said, oh, this is interesting. Can we have a conversation? Was SC Heerenveen in the Netherlands. And it basically just started out as an informal conversation. It was just, them finding out who I am, any other names they might have on their lists that they just wanted an opinion on. And it was all very informal, like I say, because they're not just going to take a chance on some random person who's just contact them out of nowhere. But that was around 4 years ago now. And that relationship has built into something which has seen me become employed by them. Don't get me wrong, it's part-time, it's not a full-time job. I still have a job outside of football. But they've put so much trust in the process for me, and I now cover the UK for them, which is primarily the under-23s, like I say, the Premier League 2, because that's not something they can cover easily. But as well as I'll go and watch a lot of League 1 and League 2 Championship games. And then obviously north of the border as well, there's a lot of players who aren't getting chances, or they are, but not in the right environments. So there's a lot to go through, but it's exciting. I know I'm a very, very lucky person. I should not have broke into the game at such a high level. We spoke about this a couple of times, and if you're looking to break into scouting, one of the big things I say is don't be afraid of just putting yourself out there and making a mistake. And the normal way is to start lower and build up. I know I've started quite high, but I have also proved myself, and I did work for free at the start. I'm not afraid to say that. And I know it's frowned upon for a lot of people, and say you should be paid for your time and things like that. But I had no track record. I had nothing behind me. And I felt it was a way of me showing my commitment and desire to work with the club, which they repaid me in the end. And yeah, it's blossomed into something that I absolutely.
That's fantastic. I think you have to say that, one of the things I admire about you is, and anyone listening obviously can probably pick it up. You've kind of essentially carved your way into the industry just through your, innovation and also your hard work and determination. So just for those who maybe want a bit of background in terms of Heerenveen as well, they're currently 10th in the Eredivisie, of course, competing against the likes of Ajax, PSV, AZ Alkmaar, Feyenoord. So, a sort of a top European club really. And for you to have carved your way into a role there as their UK scout is, like I say, it shows really great initiative. And, we're going to talk about yourself in a little bit more detail as we go along in this podcast. And really, we're going to put you to the test now and start seeing what your knowledge is like. So I'm delighted to have you on this show. And as I say, we will talk a little bit more about yourself as well as we go along. So Alexander, I mean, we want to sort of start. When we started this podcast, we had a little pre-match discussion, and we realised that this is such an in-depth topic that we could be here for quite a while. So what we've done is we've kind of separated the different squads. Of course, the tournament has 4 groups: Group A, B, C, and D. And of course, the it kicks off on the 24th of March, and it's going to be a tournament where it's actually split between 2 different periods this time, the 2021 championships. So the way that UEFA are structuring this competition is there will be a group stage between the 24th and the 31st of March. In the UK, it will be available on for example, I think Sky Sports have the broadcast rights, so you can watch that on their YouTube channel, and also, of course, I think on UEFA's official website. And then there's a knockout stage, which begins in May, 31st of May to the 6th of June. So, yeah, it's kind of split into 2 different periods. And the host countries are Hungary and Slovenia. So there's, 8 different venues, 8 different host cities. And it will be kicking off, tomorrow. So what we're going to do on this podcast in terms of structure, we're going to begin by looking at sort of some players to watch. We've separated it into that. We're going to look at sort of who are the favourites of the competition. And then in part 2, we're going to pick out sort of 3 nations whose squads bear particular spotlight. I won't spoil it for you who they are, but we'll look at 3 of the top nations and kind of talk about more widely their general youth development, how they're evolving, how they might look, and that kind of thing. So hopefully it will provide a lot of value, not only looking at players to watch, but also looking at certain nations that we'll talk about in some depth. So where we're going to start is, that's the little preview in terms of how it's going to be structured, the tournament. We're going to pick sort of 25 players to watch now, and just going to name them all, and then we'll go through each player and just sort of basically have a couple of minutes on each one, and then as we go along, we'll talk about the nations as well. Now for this podcast, so I'll give a spoiler by one of the nations, and one of the nations that we're going to talk about in the second part in more detail is France, because as anyone who will know, if you've seen the French squad for this Under-21 European Championships, I will describe it as an absolute joke. And we could pick every single player in the squad, and then your 25 to watch would be, 20 French players. So we're going to kind of basically not include any French players in this players to watch, and we're going to cover those players in the second part of this show. But apart from them, we're going to pick out, and also England as well. We're going to leave England as well to one side, bar one player. But here are some names to watch in Xander. We're going to, Alexander, we're going to also ask you about some of these players. So, Alexander, are you sort of ready to get into this 25 players that we're going to pick out to watch? And are you prepared for this detailed discussion of players? Are you ready? You got your scouting notes ready?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, so we sorted it out by groups, to look at it from that point of view. Group A is Hungary, Germany, Romania, and the Netherlands. We've got in Group B, we've got Slovenia, Spain, Czech Republic, and Italy. In Group C, we have Russia, Iceland, France, and Denmark. And then in Group D, we have Portugal, Croatia, England, and Switzerland. So here, without further ado, are our 25 players to watch. So we've got Ridley Baku of Germany, Youssoufa Moukoko of Germany, Malik Malik of Germany as well. We've got Boton Ballo. We've got Teon Koopmeiners. We've got Sven Botman. We've got Myron Boadu. We've got Radu, all of the Netherlands, by the way. We've got Radu Dragusin. We've got Matej Kovar. Ladislav Kirechi, hopefully I pronounced it correctly. Gianluca Scamacca of Italy. Sandro Tonali, Italy. Ricky Puig, Spain. Oscar Mingueza, Spain. Jesper Lindstrom, Denmark. Mohamed Darami, Denmark. Wahid Fagir, Denmark. Then we've got Izak Bergman Johannesson, Iceland. Igor Divyev of Russia. Lovro Mayer. Then we've got Curtis Jones. Of course, we said we'll pick one English player just to have in that list. Florentino Luis, Portugal. Rafael Liao, Portugal. Francisco Trincao, Portugal. And finally, Alex Yankovic, Switzerland, obviously, Switzerland, Yankovic. So that's the kind of long list. And now, Alexander, over to you. Basically, we're going to begin by talking about, we're going to start in Group A. So let's look at the players that you've selected here. Now, firstly, Rile Baku. What are your thoughts on this player? Because he's one that you've scouted a fair amount of times and you know a fair amount about.
Yeah, he's a really interesting player. I mean, at Mainz, he was one of the standout players over the last year or two, and he did tremendously well. And then he off the back of that, he earned his move to Wolfsburg. And he's one of those players, I'm not sure exactly which position he's going to feature in this tournament. Is he going to play in his traditional fullback role, or is he going to play potentially a little bit higher up on the right wing, where he's played quite a little bit for Wolfsburg in recent months? He's a really exciting player. I think anybody who's watched anything of the Bundesliga will tell you Baku is probably unfortunate not to be in the senior squad for Germany this time round. His performances have been that impressive. I mean, he's very, very strong in his acceleration and past the player, and he's got that really beautiful little shift of a yard or two, which gets him away from a player, but it also works going backwards as well and helps him recover if he makes a mistake or anything. And he's somebody, I think, who people might not necessarily know because he's not at one of the stereotypically big German clubs. And this could be his tournament just to put himself really in that window. And like I say, for me, he should have been in the senior squad this time round for Germany. So he is one that I expect to put in big performances in a German team that it's not unbelievable. It's exciting at times. It's middle of the line, I would say. I think they would agree they've had better squads and they've had worse squads. It's just okay. But I think him and Van Norman as well, who's at Hamburg, very similar. And I would like to see them both playing as the fullbacks in this team. And I think if there's one player particular in this squad I'm looking forward to, I would say it is Baku, just because of that pure electricity that he's got.
Yeah, this is a player who, as you've mentioned, is at VfL Wolfsburg, a 22-year-old German right-back. He's also played in midfield at times, 74 appearances in the Bundesliga, and he's also scored 8 goals. So, that's pretty productive in terms of goal numbers for someone who plays further back. You've mentioned Germany there, and, they're kind of fourth favourites for this tournament. They're not maybe expected to do as well as maybe they have done in the past, such a proud nation, especially at this level. You think of players like Mesut Ozil in the past. I remember the Germany-England game many years ago where they smashed England. I think it was in the semi-finals with that team of Ozil and many other players. Fantastic German sort of youth teams of the past. They're not as maybe highly rated this time, are they, Alexander? But they do have some good players.
No, like you say, I think it's very much a middle-of-the-line team. Like you say, they're one of the favourites from the bookmakers for the tournament, but I personally wouldn't have them up there. Don't get me wrong. It's Germany. In these tournaments, they can always just turn up, and as a collective, it could work. But as a group of individuals, I'm not entirely sure that it's the highest quality they've had. But it could just work. I think when I was looking earlier at some of the research, there was only Iceland in qualifying in terms of the teams who've qualified for the tournament that conceded more than this Germany team, which obviously traditionally you'd say Germany quite strong at the defence. And when I looked at the individuals in the squad, I actually felt that the defence is probably where the strength was as well, which confused me a little bit. I think they're going to be I'm not sure.
It certainly wants to watch that. The odds reflect that they're kind of fourth favourites, which maybe you might expect in the past. They might be slightly higher, But we will see. We've got to move on to one player who, a lot of the players in this squad as well, for anyone who's going to be watching this tournament, one thing I've noticed is a lot of the players are maybe slightly older in the age categories. A lot of 23-year-old players, for example, which, they are still technically eligible because the cycle begins when the qualifiers begin in terms of eligibility. But, 23 is kind of the upper age limit, really, of under-21s football. But there's one player on this list who is nowhere near that threshold. And that is 16-year-old Youssoufa Moukoko, who has a lot of eyes on him. If you've seen him already for Borussia Dortmund, then you may already know this player and you may be quite excited about him. If you haven't seen him, then Alexander, I'm going to let you take it away. He's already played 14 games for Borussia Dortmund as a 16-year-old. A lot of hype about this player, and he's already made it to Germany's under-21 European Championship squad. Youssoufa Moukoko, Alexander.
Yeah, he's one of those, I think everybody's heard the name since he was 13, 14, scoring 100 goals in a season and earning these large sponsorship contracts at Nike. And I think everybody's expecting a heck of a lot from him, which is a little bit unfair considering, like I say, he's still eligible for the under-16 teams. To have that many appearances already in the Bundesliga at his age, you've got to have a lot of ability. There's no doubt about that. And the biggest asset he does have is that left foot of his is like a hammer. It is absolutely superb, but he's also proven himself to be physically ready in the Bundesliga, which is the impressive thing. Many people at that sort of age can be technically there and ready, but the physicality is what is keeping them back. I go straight away to thinking of a 16-year-old who was physically ready is Wayne Rooney when he burst onto the scene. And I'm not comparing him to Wayne Rooney. That's not what I'm saying at all. But in terms of somebody who was ready to go into these sort of things at that age. And Moukoko is a goal scorer. His record says that as well. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how Germany use him, which is what I would say. I mean, they do have Berisha and Nemetra who possibly might get ahead of him as well as Burkhardt. So I think his minutes are more likely to come off the bench if he's to play.
Yeah, and he's a player you've seen live, isn't he? You've scouted him before in the past.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to see him around 15 months ago when he was playing in the the UEFA Youth League for Dortmund when they played over in England against Derby County. He didn't have the best of days on that occasion, but you could see the talent was there in terms of his off-the-ball movements, and he was the youngest in that team and the youngest on the pitch by quite some distance. He was only under 15 at the time, but he was getting visibly frustrated and demanding a lot more from his teammates who simply couldn't provide for him that day. But in the warm-up and things, he was taking shots and they just weren't missing. It was one side it'd be in bottom corner, the other side he'd got top corner, and then he'd chip the keeper. And yeah, sometimes you just watch someone and you just think, wow, there's something here that you've got to watch. And obviously the reputation he had as well. So he is someone that's exciting, and he's one of those, if he gets on and if he scores in this tournament, there will be a lot of more noise around him as well. So you've got to be excited.
Yeah, he's an exciting player. The youngest goal scorer in Bundesliga history at the age of 16 years and 28 days. He's also the youngest player to play in the Champions League in the competition's history at 16 years and 18 days. So that was a pretty busy early 10-day spell of his 16th year alive, and yeah, certainly has a lot of potential. So keep an eye on Youssoufa Moukoko if you haven't seen him already. The final player we've picked from this German squad, which I'll briefly talk about, is Malik Malik. Now he is a player at Schalke who have had a disastrous season, really, looking like they're bang on for relegation to the Bundesliga 2, which is going to be a real disaster for such a big club. But they do have one potential star to look out for, a player that I've watched myself, Malik who I really think has got a bright future. He's a 19-year-old player, centre-back, and he's already sort of made his way into the team. He's made 19 appearances for Schalke now, and there's already sort of talks of interest from him from other clubs watching him and that kind of thing. Is it a player that you're aware of, Alexander, at all by any chance? Or
no, I can't say I have really. He's not someone that I've looked at personally. It's a bit higher than the levels I'd usually look at or have to come across. So no, it's not someone really that I have any form of opinion on. So that one will have to be all you're doing, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I certainly think, won't talk about him for too long, but I would say I'm not entirely sure if he'll start. I assume perhaps he has a chance, but if he does, then certainly keep an eye out for him. I think he's very technically able, good on the ball, good sort of physical profile, and decent bringing the ball out from the back. And as a left-sided centre back, you don't get too many of them, do you? And having already broken into the side, I think he's definitely one to watch. And I would expect that if he was to be relegated with Schalke, that there'd probably be a bit of interest in him. So keep an eye out for Malik Malik as well in that Germany side. We're going to move on to another name now, and this is in a different national team setup, the Netherlands, which they have some serious talent as well. And we may cover them a little bit more as well in part two. But I just want to firstly ask you about one player who really, really does stand out on our list, and that's Teun Koopmeiners. Alexander, tell us about him. Obviously, Netherlands is your region in terms of the clubs that you work for. There's a lot of talk about in the Netherlands right now, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, he's arguably up there with the top three performers in the Eredivisie this season. He's been absolutely tremendous, and he's been one of those who's developed so well consistently as well. He was so strong when he originally came through as a centre midfielder, and then because of a few injuries over the previous years, he was asked to move back to a centre back role, which for his development, that was the best thing that happened for him. He improved so many areas of his game, which were arguably a little bit weaker in terms of his anticipation and his decision making of when to engage, when not to engage. He could see the bigger picture in front of him, and his distribution was always exceptional. That's been one of his large strengths. But that shift when he went back allowed him then, when he's moved forward again this season, he's just taken the league by storm again. And if there is to be a penalty for the Netherlands, he will take it and he will score. It's as simple as that. So he's one of those, if Netherlands go all the way, he could end up actually being the top goal scorer, despite him playing either as the continental six, as you would say, as a defensive midfielder, or as the box-to-box 8. So he's just tremendous. I mean, I can't see him staying at AZ beyond this summer.
Yeah, he's a 23-year-old player now. His transfer market value is 15.75 million. He really is excelling this year, as you've said, at AZ. 27 appearances, 15 goals, 5 assists. What's the hype about him in terms of the league itself, Alexander? Is he considered as someone who will be on his way soon? Has there been rumours of him maybe moving on to other clubs? And what you've mentioned a little bit there, his attributes. Well, what stands him out to maybe go to that next level?
Yeah, I don't know necessarily about any rumours that I've seen, but I know certainly a lot of clubs will be watching him very, very closely, and especially in this tournament, they'll want to see him in the bigger games, being that decisive player. And like I say, he's not really someone that I would say thrives in carrying the ball a lot, but in terms of his ability to break lines with passes and to really, really stretch teams with how unbelievably he is with that passing, it's just tremendous to watch at times. And I would have liked to have seen him make the move maybe last summer, but I understand why some teams might have held back, possibly, like I say, because he's not that quick. And like I say, he doesn't carry the ball tremendously well, but he has shown this season that is, like I say, another improving area. But the ball playing qualities are just tremendous of him. And I would love to see him in the Premier League in the summer. But at the same time, like I say, he's not going to stay within the Eredivisie. I can't see it. It's just, he's exhausted now. It's not become easy for him, but it's got to the point where I don't think he's going to develop or learn anymore. He needs to branch out. And at 23 now, probably going to be one of the leaders in this team, it's time for him to go.
Yeah, and just for a few statistics there, in case anyone is interested in diving in a bit more detail, he is second in the Eredivisie for completed passes. According to Wyscout, 1,835 passes completed, behind only Daley Blind in the league. He's also fourth in the league for passes into the successful passes into the final third, 299. So you can see, he's a really progressive style and a player that a lot of people are looking at and want to watch, certainly in this tournament. We're going to skip the two players that we've mentioned on our players to watch, because Netherlands will be covered in part two when we look at some of the favourites. So Sven Botman and Myron Boadu, keep an eye out for later in this show. But we're going to move on to one player now who's called Radu Dragusin, who's caught your eye, Alexander.
Yeah, I can't say I know him inside out, but he's certainly someone who he's got a profile club in being at Juventus, and it looks to have shown enough to say that if Romania are going to have a strong performance in this tournament, he's going to have to be one of the players that really stands up and say, I'm the man, you're going to rely on me here. And I think in recent days, I could be wrong, he's been linked with Crystal Palace, but don't take that as gospel, I'm not sure. But looking at him briefly, he's a very, very dominant defender, both on the ground and in the air in his Italian venture so far. And he is going to be relied upon if he's to start and Romania to do well here. I don't know a lot about him, but from what I've seen, he's going to be someone they're going to have to rely on.
Yeah, and Radu Dragozin, he's in the Romanian squad, probably the standout player for Romania in terms of maybe profile. He's a 19-year-old centre-back playing at Juventus, born in 2002. He's not quite obviously broken into the squad. He's played a couple of games in Serie A, one game in Serie A, and 2 games in the Coppa Italia this season for Juventus, mainly playing in their sort of youth sides as well. But certainly seems like there's a lot of potential in this player, and he'd be one in that Romanian squad to keep an eye on. Interestingly enough, with Romania, their manager for this tournament is Adrian Mutu. So anybody who's followed football in the 90s, early 2000s will be quite familiar with Adrian Mutu, bit of a legendary character, formerly of Chelsea and many others. Had a bit of a playboy lifestyle, according to all reports. And interestingly enough, and this takes us on to the next player we're going to talk about in Group A, rounding off Group A. We've talked about Germany, we've talked about the Netherlands, we've picked one player from Romania. Rounding off the group is Hungary, and they are also coached by a bit of a former Premier League notable name in Zoltán Gera. Now, anybody who is follows West Brom or remembers Premier League years will remember Zoltán Gera quite fondly. His celebrations, he was quite a successful player. So Mutu will meet Zoltán Gera as they go face to face in this group stage. And you've picked out a player at Hungary that's caught your eye in the past.
Yeah, I've seen handfuls of him, and it's Botond Balo. I'm sorry if I've butchered that saying, but yeah, he's a centre back, and so far in his young career, he's looked very assured, and he's made the move across to Italy to Parma, and he's featured 3 or 4 times, I believe, for the first team, and he's not done anything wrong. He's just looked okay. Yeah, I'm sure his statistics say that he looks solid, and yeah, he's just been very settled in what he does, and nothing outstanding, nothing horrendous, just very middle of the line. But going into a team like Parma at such a young age in a top 5 league, that's a big compliment. So in terms of a Hungary team that I don't know an awful lot about, to be honest, he was a name that jumped straight out in terms of he's at a big club and he's on the fringes of a team in the top 5 division already. And yeah, if they're to do something well or cause an upset, I think he's going to be one who you're probably going to look at and say, wow, he's done something well here.
Yeah, he's come from MTK Budapest. He's, as you say, a young player who's made his way to Parma. Probably going to play an important role, according to reports in kind of Hungarian media and that kind of thing. That there's been a lot of talk about him. So he's certainly one to keep an eye out for. I think Botond Balo. There's quite a few defenders in this list so far. Yeah, he's also adapted quite well. So, and captained the side as well in the past, I think, at youth levels. So certainly one to keep an eye out for there from Hungary. Let's move on to Group B then. And you've gone for a goalkeeper as your first pick.
Yeah, the goalkeeper I've gone for is from the Czech Republic, Matej Kovar. I mean, he's somebody I've seen an awful lot in my time covering the Premier League 2 in the UK. And he's with Man United at the moment. And he's been on loan for the first half of the season at Swindon Town, but he's one of those goalkeepers. I think if you ever come across a more relaxed goalkeeper in his approach, I'd be surprised. He's just basically horizontal in his approach. It's crazy at times, but the effect that has on the players in front of him is absolutely remarkable. I mean, the way he plays the ball out from the back as well and distributes it, he's so relaxed. It's, to use a golfing term, when they talk about the smooth stroke that he has, his foot just flows through the ball so nicely. Don't get me wrong, he's not always truly accurate with it, but the technique behind it is absolutely outstanding. And I've seen him in a few of the EFL trophy games to the Man United team as well, and he was absolutely superb in the one against Rotherham in particular. That comes to mind, and where it was his first taste in that sort of environment against a very big physical Rotherham team, and they were putting high balls into the box. He was just coming out so confidently, and taking the pressure off the back four in front of him, which was just, it was a joy to watch at times. He does have, because of this relaxed approach at the same time, have a mistake in him. But when he's on it, he is fantastic. And he could win a game for Czech Republic on his own from in the goal, which is a huge, huge compliment to him. But he will make an error at some stage in the tournament, and it's whether it costs them or not. And it will be a very, very, very basic error. I've seen shots come straight to him and he's had his hands behind the ball and it's just gone through his hands. So he's somebody on his day could win them the game, but he could cost them. So he's an exciting one. He's a young goalkeeper. It's not something I can say I specialise in as a position, but I've liked what I've seen of him, and he's got a big future ahead of me if you ask me as a goalkeeper.
What do you look for when you scout a goalkeeper, Alexander, compared to an outfield player? Is there particular things that you keep an eye out for? Particular traits that you look for? How do you sort of project the potential of a goalkeeper?
It's a tough one, really. Like I say, it's not a position that I would say I specialise in. It's something that I am improving on myself. But what I would say is, in a similar way to an outfield player, but more so with a goalkeeper, is how they react to the mistake. Because as a goalkeeper, one mistake, maybe you can get away with it. An outfield player, one mistake, it might not even cost you. But in net, you can't have 2, 3, 4 mistakes. And it's the attitude and their approach to addressing those issues. Like I say, Kovar, I've seen him make 1 or 2 mistakes in the past. And the thing that's impressed me is the way he's approached the game straight away afterwards. He's been the one who's been encouraging his teammates. He's held his hand up and said, yeah, that was my fault. But he's such a positive mindset, which is tough to find when you make a mistake. It's a natural thing when you've made a mistake is to kick yourself a little bit, but he just kind of ignores it. He's had one game, I believe, where he made a couple of mistakes, and that was as soon as he came back from Swindon this year from his loan spell. And I think it was against Leicester City under 23s. He made 2, 3 or 4 mistakes, and they weren't good at all, but you could tell he's had a knock in confidence. I don't think he'd done particularly well on his loan spell, but generally speaking, the way he addresses his mistakes is he just blocks it out, which is a tremendous trait to have at an elite level. But something I would say is about goalkeepers that I look for especially is, it was something a goalkeeping coach told me, actually. I don't know how correct he is or how wrong he is, but it was the placement of the hands in a neutral position. Like I say, I'm not a goalkeeper myself. I don't know much about this, but they were saying is particularly from range, they want to have the hands in a very neutral position in the middle. They don't want them too high or too low. So then they've got a quicker response time to either of the actions happening. So they can just flick their arms up, they can flick their arms down. So like I say, it's not a position I specialise in. I am more of an outfield person. But yeah, sometimes you just get a feel for a player and you say, oh, there's some nice things here. And I will ask people who are more goalkeeping experts, and I'll say, oh, watch this player. What do you think? And they'll tell me more, and it's something that I personally know I need to progress on. So yeah, it's a tough position to judge. For me, it's a specialised position. So I think it's a role that, as a scout, I think teams maybe should look to get a goalkeeping scout in. I don't think it's the end. I don't think it's a bad idea, but how often are you going to need a new goalkeeper at the same time? So I understand teams not going that way as well. So yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, tough position to scout, but obviously a skill that takes a lot of time to acquire, and sounds like you've got some good insights there as well yourself. Let's run through some of the names because we could be here all day otherwise with the amount of players that we've picked in this 25. So we've got Ladislav Kirechi, who we'll talk about briefly. Hopefully I'll pronounce that correctly as well, for the Czech Republic. He is a 21-year-old defensive midfielder. He's played 59 games in the Fortuna Liga, 6 goals, 2 assists. He's also appeared in the Europa League for the club, Sparta Prague. And, looks like a player who has a lot of interest in him as well. He's appeared at various age groups, 5 goals in 9 appearances at under-21 level. So keep an eye on Ladislav Kirechi. We then picked out 2 Italian players, Gianluca Scamacca and Sandro Tonali. Now, Sandro Tonali, of course, many will be familiar with AC Milan. He's been kind of christened as the new kind of, the new Pirlo, hasn't he? Maybe partly just because of his sort of similarity physically to him in terms of his features and his long dark hair. Maybe as a player, does he actually match him? Give us your brief thoughts on those 2 players to look out for in the Italy squad, Alexander.
Yeah, Scamacca was one that particularly stood out to me in the Under-20 World Cup a couple of years ago, which I'm sure many people who watched that tournament will agree with. He's a very big striker, and he's not your traditional target man, though at the same time is very good on his feet, and he's hung around the Serie A level for a couple of seasons now, and he went a very unorthodox route. I believe he came through actually in his early development years, sort of at PSV Eindhoven, which is a bit strange in terms of it's not your traditional route for an Italian. But yeah, he's going to be the player I think Italy will depend on if they're to go far in the tournament in general. He will have to grab the goals. He will be keying a lot of their build-up play as well. And like I say, despite his size, he is very, very good with his feet, and they will rely on him a lot. And it's going to be interesting to see whether he's part of a front two or a front three, because they have varied their approach a bit. And with them bringing Cutrone into the team as well, if Cutrone is going to start, is Cutrone going to be out wide, or is it going to be ahead of Scamacca? I'm unsure. I would say probably out wide. But yeah, he's going to be key to them progressing far, because they will rely upon him. With regards to Tonali, it's an interesting one, like you say, because his profile is huge, absolutely huge for a player of his age, and he hasn't got a lot of experience still, and so much is expected of him. Like you say, the comparison to Pirlo was made so early on because of probably his position, like you say, the long hair, and yeah, he's far from started well at AC Milan this year, and I'm sure AC Milan will be a little bit disappointed with that. But at the same time, is that down to AC Milan's tactical approach? It could be. Is it down to maybe Tonali needing a little bit more time to adjust and develop in areas of his game? Possibly. I'm sure that he will be a big part of this under-21s team. I mean, he's already been involved at senior setups with the Italian side, so clearly big things are expected of him. But I think you've got to be cautious with him and not to put too much pressure on him, because he's a nice cultured footballer. But me personally, I think it's a lot of unnecessary overhype, if you ask me.
Yeah, and he's sort of plays in that regista role, as you say. He's actually on loan from Brescia. Milan have an option to buy for 15 million euros, maybe with bonuses, according to reports of extra bonuses of 10 million. So maybe this is his chance really to impress. As you say, he's not really been a mainstay of that Milan side this season. There is one player that we will talk about later who's become a bit more of a significant player in that squad, in that Milan squad. But Tonali certainly one to look out for. Technically a decent midfield player. He's got an elegant style about him, which is probably where the Pirlo comparisons come from. But as you say, sometimes the hype can be a little bit too much in the way that people are immediately likened to other players, and that is a bit of a danger of scouting, isn't it? Really, Alexander, which I think is an interesting one to consider. Let's move on to the Spain squad. It's their second favourites for this tournament. A proud history again at this level. Really do perform well, and potentially probably maybe the favourite, to emerge from Group B. Ricky Puig and Oscar Mingueza, two players you've picked out. Now we'll skip over Mingueza. Of course, he plays for Barcelona. He's a 21-year-old player, another sort of defensive player. So quite a few defensive players on this list so far. Mainly centre back, can also play as a full back. He's played 19 games for Barcelona, so he's really breaking into Ronald Koeman's team, and certainly is someone to keep an eye on. And Ricky Puig is someone that we are quite fond of at Just Football. We've had him on in our JF20, which Alexander, you were part of last a couple of years ago now, at Barcelona. Just compare him to Tonali for me in terms of stylistically. Obviously, they play a similar position in midfield, similar elegance. Give us a very quick overview of Ricky Puig and what to look out for with him.
What I would say is Puig is a much better ball carrier. He's absolutely tremendous at receiving the ball a little bit higher up than Tonali, and he will look to play more of a box-to-box and connect the dots and maybe work between the lines a little bit more offensively. But the way he receives the ball on the half-turn and swivels with it, he's just glorious. I mean, he's so unlucky that he's got Pedri, De Jong, Busquets, these people ahead of him at Barcelona at the moment, because he's just such a tremendous talent to watch. And don't get me wrong, he's still very much in that boy frame as a physical build, but the way he just glides around the pitch and the way he picks the passes off so easily, the quick 1-2s with inverted wingers, and the way he glides in, especially from the left half of the pitch, he just loves to drive in towards the goal area. And I think he's just majestic as a footballer. I absolutely love watching him, and he's someone that I just can't wait to watch more of. And I think this could be a stage for him where people already know him, people already think he's amazing. But I think this is the platform where people go, if he's not playing at Barcelona, we have to get him. It's that simple.
Really interesting overview there, and certainly some good insight. We'll now move on to Group C. So we're going to briefly rush through these, and then in part 2 we're going to talk about some of the favourites, as I say. So we got Jesper Lindstrom of Denmark. We've got Mohamed Daramy of Denmark as well. The French squad, like I say, they're going to be in a whole separate section because there's too many to name. For Russia, we've got Igor Diveyev, and then we've got Iceland as well. Izak, Bergman, Henderson. We've also got Wahid Fagir of Denmark. Alexander, start us off with this Danish squad because they've got quite a few talents that have caught your eye.
Just before we came on, I was telling you, this Danish squad, I wouldn't say they're a dark horse because they've got some fantastic players, but in terms of, I think they're overlooked. I mean, Jesper Lindstrom, especially, 18 months ago, was a player that everyone was thinking, oh yeah, he's a good player, nice player, he could potentially make one step up, maybe 2 steps up. But since the summer, he's just been outstanding. I mean, his team at domestic level up there at the top of the league, I believe, at the moment. And that is mainly because of Jesper Lindstrom. He is an absolute star in the team. And he was very much more a winger in years gone by. And his move inside as more of an 8 or a 10 has been the making of him. And the way he carries the ball is so delightful. And he loves to bend a shot into the far corner from the left half of the pitch. And yeah, he's one thing I would say to look out for is I've seen some comparisons in his style of play. And what I would say is I'm not comparing him to this player before anyone brings me up on it, is just watch the way that he plays drilled, low-driven passes in the final third. He's so much like De Bruyne's technique. So he's clearly watched something of De Bruyne and the way he passes the ball, which is a huge, huge praise to him. I'm not saying he's De Bruyne, or I'm not saying he's going to be the next De Bruyne, but the pass he makes, the technique on it is so similar. But yeah, he's such a strong talent, and this could be his platform again to just announce himself on the bigger stage, so to speak. And yeah, I think Viktor Nelson's another one who people have known about for a few years now, and I think he's going to be one of the older players in this tournament. But at the back, he is that stereotypical Scandinavian big dominant defender, and yeah, he's going to be a key down that core of the team for them. So Jesper Lindstrom's a star for me, and Viktor Nelson's going to catch the eye of a couple if they've not seen him before. And like we say, Wahid Fagir, I can't say I've seen a lot of him myself, but in terms of, he's 17 and he's already making a big impact in the Superliga in Denmark. He's somebody you've got to take note of. It's not a case of if you've seen him or you've not seen him. I think he's going to be a case of if he gets on, he could just come up with a vital goal or two here, and then he's the next best thing before you know it. So who knows? But it's certainly one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and just to round it off, Mohamed Daramy as well is a player with fantastic pace at FC Copenhagen, good ball carrier. He's a strong runner. He's got the ability to sort of power pass players. He can get space away to get shots in 1v1 situations. I think he's another player to look out for. He was part of that side that made it quite deep in the Europa League last season. Of course, played Manchester United, and certainly as a young player, Daramy is one you want to be keeping an eye on. Only 19 years old. We then move on to, Scandinavia is creating a lot of talents, and something we talk about a lot on the Nordic Football Podcast, which is a separate podcast that I'm involved with. But yeah, Iceland, of course, one player that I'll quickly talk about is Izak Bergman Henderson. Firstly, we have to say happy birthday to him, because I think today is his 18th birthday on this day of recording. So, happy birthday to Izak. He's at Norrköping in Sweden's Allsvenskan. He will be the standout player for Iceland, I'm pretty sure. A fantastic midfield player. I said it many times before, but he's born in Sutton Coldfield, so I don't know if Gareth Southgate wants to have a little word and maybe put a word in to sort of sign him up. But in terms of his ability, he was one of the top assist providers in the league last season in the Allsvenskan, and that's breaking through as a 17-year-old, playing in the top league like the Allsvenskan. To break through at that level and sort of come through says a lot. One of the things I can talk about in terms of his mentality, I can remember Jonathan Levi, who was a player at Norrköping as well, said he has the best mentality I've ever seen of a player that age. He said his determination and his understanding and game awareness are at levels that he's never seen before in a young player. And that really did bear out in the way Bergman Henderson progressed as the season went on. He really became an important player in that Norrköping side and started to take the mantle on. He was their sort of key assist provider. He's really good on both feet. He's creative. He can go down the lines as well. He can sort of get crosses in, or he can play through balls, key passes. Certainly from my point of view, I think he's one of the most exciting talents in Scandinavia. And, if we do get to see him in this tournament, I think he will show that. I think he's at a level where he could be one of the players of the tournament if Iceland are able to progress. And Iceland are a team to watch because they do have a few other young talents coming through that would be worth sort of keeping an eye on. But Bergman and Henderson certainly, I would suggest, is the standout in that Iceland team. Russia, you picked out Igor Deviev, Alexander. Now we're going to sort of rush through. We've got about 4 or 5 names left, 5, 6 names. And then in part 2, we're going to cover the main contenders for this tournament. But tell us about Deviev, if you can, quickly, in terms of this group.
Yeah, I didn't want to go for the traditional big names in the squad, in Fedor Chalov and Suleymanov at Krasnodar. So Igor Deviev is a dominant centre-back. The only way I can describe him to those who haven't seen him is, if you've seen Sven Botman, he's very much a Russian Sven Botman in terms of, as a centre-back, he's very dominant at winning the ball. He's a nice ball player to an extent, but he's not the most mobile of defenders. He's just very, very solid in everything he does. He's just a very, very smart, natural defender. And he's someone that I think he'll catch the eye in this tournament. He's someone in the group they're in. I think he's going to have to do a fair bit of work. So I think he's going to be pushed and tested at the right sort of levels. He's already a regular in the CSKA Moscow team at his age. And I think he's somebody that he could make a name for himself. Don't get me wrong, it's not a pathway usually that most people look for in terms of bringing players out of Russia. I know you've got a few outliers in terms of Andrei Arshavin, you've had Golovin, you've had Pavlyuchenko, you've had a couple. But generally speaking, they don't tend to move into Europe, so to speak. But Igor Deviev is someone that I like, and I think this could be a tournament for him to say, I'm one of the defenders you should be talking more about. So, he's a nice player.
Yeah, I can see from your choices, Alexander, you certainly keep an eye out for your defenders. So I don't know if Heerenveen may be looking for a defender, but I'm seeing a trend in terms of your selections with defensive players, which is an interesting one. But let's that kind of rounds off Group C. Like I say, France we're going to talk about in the next section in part 2, because, as I say, where do you start? Anyone who's sort of eagle-eyed and listening into this podcast, or eagle-eared, probably notices that we haven't picked any players from Slovenia. Now, the reason for that, in Group B, they are the host nation, but we didn't feel probably we know enough about their players to really feel confident to sort of pick a name out, and didn't want to kind of do a disservice and just randomly sort of pick anyone out. But one thing you may like to know as well, we talked about Adrian Mutu and Zoltan Gira. Well, Slovenia are managed by a former Tottenham player, Milinko Asimovic. Now, anyone who may remember the former Tottenham teams of that era as well, he's another player who played in the Premier League. A bit of a sort of a, it might be a quiz question in terms of, Tottenham players of the past, Milinko Asimovic. But just to note, he will be their manager. And they do have one or two sort of interesting players to potentially look out for. But I think we've left them to one side in this tournament. And, maybe if you're listening to this podcast and you are of a Slovenian persuasion, please tweet us at Just Football and let us know which players we should be looking out for and that we've maybe overlooked. We're going to move now on to the final group in terms of our analysis of players to watch. That is Group D. Alexander, I'm going to start you off with Curtis Jones. Now, when you scout players, you've done a lot of work in this region at Premier League 2 level, looking at youth players in that level. You've watched Curtis Jones many a time, haven't you? And that's why you've selected him in that England squad as one player that you want to particularly watch out for.
Yeah, I mean, Curtis Jones since 15, 16 has been somebody that, even under 23 levels, he's just stood out in terms of he's got that arrogance about him, but not in a negative way. He's got the right amount of arrogance to know, I can do this in this moment, and you can trust me to be the man that you need to go and make the difference here. And he's just such a clever individual. I mean, it got to the point where the under 23s had completely exhausted it, and he was stagnating in his development a little bit because they were playing him as a left winger actually in the end, and Harvey Elliott on the right wing, and he was getting the ball and he could beat a player 2-3 times, and then he'd go back and do it again just because he could, because it was so easy for him. And his mind works at a different rate to other players at that sort of level. He's not a left winger, and he won't play a left wing there, and he doesn't play there for Liverpool. But it was a testament to him that he could go out into that position and still be so dominant. The older he gets, I do see him playing more as an 8 or a box-to-box, and that's where he's operating a bit more at Liverpool now. But his most incisive moments, as he's been coming through, have come in that number 10 role. He's the player who Liverpool were going to and saying, right, we need something to happen here. We need a creative spark, or we need a goal. Go make it happen. So they were giving him the ball. He would skip past a player and play a ball in for one of the wide players, or he would take a shot from the edge of the box. And he's just a delightful talent. Like I say, he's got the right amount of arrogance about his play to go far in the game. And I mean, as a local Liverpool boy, I don't see him moving away from there in the near future, really. And he's breaking into this Liverpool team now under Jurgen Klopp, and I don't think he's going to get a better chance than in the next few months, when it looks like Gini Wijnaldum could be on his way to really nail down a position in that starting team now and become a real mainstay for years to come.
Yeah, and in terms of his evolution as a player that you scouted, how has he kind of evolved since you first saw him, as you say, when he was sort of 16, you mentioned? How has he evolved in that time into that first team? How have you seen his game evolve?
Yeah, when he was 16, he was very much, right, give me the ball, I want to dribble all the way from the halfway line and then put it in. And as he got more experience and he learned the game more, he learned the exact moments of when to travel with the ball and when to release it a lot more. But he was only taking the players on because he could, and the levels was too easy for him, and he was stepping up the levels and still doing the same things. But he's become so much more mature in his decision making, and that arrogance has never left him, which has been the key part of him. And he's somebody, the only way that I can describe him is he will be a box-to-box because he's got so much energy and desire to play football. He just wants to have the ball. It's as simple as that. And he's had that thing about him since 16 where he just wants to play football. It doesn't matter whether he's left wing, right wing, just give him the ball and he'll enjoy playing with it. If he doesn't have the ball, you'll see him get frustrated, and he will sometimes do the occasional silly thing where it's shouting at a teammate unnecessarily, or he might just get a yellow card for something that he didn't need to. And he's still maturing, but he's
as a scout, Alexander. And when you say kind of when he was younger, he just wanted to dribble and beat everyone on the pitch. At what point as a scout do you maybe rule a player out for that, or at what point how do you look upon that when a player's maybe too good? Because obviously some people will say maybe you don't pay attention to your role. Then in that case, some players get accused of wanting to do too much. But then obviously you do need to do enough to stand out for someone who, like yourself as a scout who's watching players at youth level. Where do you draw that line when you're scouting a player between sort of not doing enough or trying to do too much? Where do you draw the line, and what little indicators do you look for in terms of assessing the balance between the two of those?
For me, it depends what stage of the development they're at. If somebody at 16 is coming into a under-23 setup and they're trying to take everyone on, I see that as a big positive because they're fearless and they're wanting to make the difference. Whereas a lot of under-23 levels, it's very much scared of making the mistake. So having somebody who just wants to take on the whole team, I find a huge positive because they've got this ability and this elite mentality of, I want to be that person to go and make a difference, or I'm going to come up with the vital moment. I mean, if somebody comes and does that at 16, it's, like I say, it's a positive, but then it's a case of you'll see the coaches at the sideline saying, oh, maybe can you do this differently next time? And then over the next year, you'll want to see them maybe, if they were doing 5 of those runs a game, you maybe want to see them do 4, and then at one moment they just play a little key pass and you think they've picked up on something, they've learned from it. But if they're still doing it at 20, 21, you're starting to think, is there a decision-making problem here? At 16, they're going to have a lot of faults. They're not going to be the finished package, far from it. It's getting rid of these bad traits or habits and the way they're taking on instructions and looking to develop themselves and progress. So like I say, with Curtis Jones, you could see him releasing the ball at the key moments as he got older. You could see him choosing the moments to drive with the ball and beat players. And he's taken that into the first team now, and he's actually passing the ball a lot more than he's dribbling with it now in the first team. So that excites me in terms of in the Liverpool first team, as the more he gets the ball, he's going to start taking on players because I know he's got that fearless streak in him.
Yeah, it's really fascinating insight there, as I say, from someone who's doing really, really well in the game yourself, Alexander. So let's run through before we end part one. We've got Florentino Luis at Portugal, Rafael Liao at Portugal, and Francisco Trincao at Portugal. Now, Florentino Luis is a player who has had a bit of a difficult season on loan at Monaco, AS Monaco. He moved from Benfica. He's a midfield player who is very, very highly rated in Portugal. He broke through and played I think it was about 20 odd games for Benfica. And then there was a sort of curious loan deal that was struck for the 21-year-old. to move to Monaco. But as I say, he's not really featured a huge amount. Has struggled to sort of adapt and integrate into that side, and I'm not entirely sure really this loan move has worked out for him. He made 7 appearances in Ligue 1. Now, question marks there about the move itself and the reasons behind it, but certainly, and whether or not Monaco will exercise their option, of course, if they have an option to buy. But I think in terms of this Portugal squad, he's certainly a player to watch. The other two, Rafael Liao and Francisco Trincao. Now, Trincao is at FC Barcelona. He's a player with a lot of ability. He scored some lovely goals, dovetailing with Lionel Messi, of course. Who else? Who better to learn from than Lionel Messi? And came from Braga, had a big reputation. Moved to Barcelona, was a little bit on the fringes, but certainly is someone in a tournament like this you should certainly keep an eye on. 21 years old and has a lot of ability as a forward player. Kind of can play across the front three, maybe, or on the wing, wide areas, maybe cutting inside. Certainly one to watch there. And Rafael Liao is a player at AC Milan. He's another 21-year-old. He was formerly of Sporting, and then of course moved to Lille. He's really, represented Portugal at all the various age groups, and he won the under-17 European Championships in 2016. So he's come through that team there. People have called him the Portuguese Mbappe, which is maybe being a bit kind, but certainly he of course played against Manchester United in the Europa League recent knockout games and showed some glimpses, and is someone that you probably would want to keep a little eye on. So we've also got Lovro Mayer. He's the player we've picked from Croatia in this Group D. Again, Croatia managed by Igor Biscan, of course, formerly of Liverpool. So this really is the managers are sort of definitely throwbacks, aren't they, Alexander, from Premier League years. Josper Guardiola was someone that we would have highlighted in this Croatia team, but he's actually withdrawn due to an injury, which is a bit of a shame. They also have Domagoj Bradovic, who's someone at Lille in France, Ligue 1, who is probably worth a watch, but we've covered quite a few defenders, so probably move on from there. But Lovro Mayer, 23-year-old at Dinamo Zagreb. Do you have any comments on him before we wrap up this section with one final player, Alexander?
Yeah, he's somebody I expect to have quite an impact, actually, in this tournament, especially in the group he's in. There's going to be quite a lot of eyes on him. He's a player that I don't know in this team whether he's going to play either as the right winger or as a centre midfielder, as more of a number 10. He's hugely left-footed. That's what I will say. No matter where it is on the pitch, he will adjust his body to make sure he plays any pass or any shot with his left foot. Forget his right foot, it's just a standing foot. He is all left-footed, but his creativity in the final third and his ability to find a half space just to get a shot away, it is tremendous. And like I say, because he is left-footed, he will naturally push more towards the left half of the pitch and look to come inside with the ball and get a shot away. He's someone who's having a tremendous season at Dinamo Zagreb, and yeah, he's somebody I expect to have quite an impact within this group if Croatia are to get out of this group at all.
Yeah, and of course he was part of the team that recently knocked out Tottenham Hotspur from the Europa League. So of course, he's in a bit of certainly in a nice little vein of form in terms of his his recent progress. So let's keep an eye on him as well. And then the final player, which we'll talk about quite quickly before we wrap up this section, is Alex Yankovic of Switzerland. You've picked out in that Group D.
Yeah, I don't expect him to start. I think he's probably going to be a substitute, which is a fair thing to say. Is obviously his big profile moment as a professional came in his debut when he was sent off in less than a minute against Man United for Southampton, which wasn't great. But in terms of his approach to the game, he's a cross between an 8 and a 6. He's very much a deeper midfielder who is a ball winner. But don't just think he is just a ball winner and that's all he does. He's got a tremendous passing range on him. I've seen him play many 40, 50-yard diagonal balls, pinpoint in his Southampton youth team. And yeah, he's somebody who's getting to that point now where I'm sure he wants senior exposure more. And did he probably ruin his chance at Southampton with that mistake? He could have, I don't know. But I'm sure as this summer approaches, he'll be looking to make an impact in this tournament, especially. And then he'll be looking to get himself some sort of senior football, whether that's a loan or he stays at Southampton, I don't know. But he's a player I like it, I think he's great. And yeah, he's one to keep an eye on if he plays. He will get his foot in there, as we saw in his senior debut. But yeah, he's a nice player. He's just someone to watch out for.
Yeah, and in January there was a lot of reports that he had handed in a transfer request, according to The Athletic, saying that the Swiss Under-21 international was disillusioned with lack of first-team opportunities. Is he a kind of player, where would you see, I'm not saying he's necessarily going to move, but where would you see as a potential destination for him, or what does he need now to develop? Because clearly, as you've picked him out, he must have some ability, but he's not quite made it in that Southampton side. What does he need now from a scouting perspective? What do you want to see him do to develop, to take that next step?
It's just that extra little bit of discipline. It's easy to say with him getting a red card in the first minute in his senior debut, but it is a running trend with him. He does pick up a lot of cards, but it's because his biggest trait is getting stuck in and looking to win the ball back in all areas. The pitch really for his midfield alongside more of a ball-playing midfielder in his current setup. And I think he just needs that stereotypical thing of experience. He just needs more exposure at a senior level, and he probably needs someone with 400-500 games at the top level next to him just to guide him a little bit in terms of how he approaches the games, not trying too hard, not doing little bits. Just, he needs a guiding hand next to him. His next step is going to be interesting. I'm sure there'll be a lot of teams out there who will be interested in him. Where that is, I don't know. He could go back to the Swiss top tier, which I don't think would be a bad move. He could go to the Bundesliga 2 in Germany. There's a lot of options available for him. He's one of those players I don't think you can say, oh, he should go to this region because he'd do better, or that region because he'd do better. I think he's very moldable in a lot of different areas, which is
tough to say. And I mean, in terms of just to round it off, of course, in this group is England, which we're going to come to in part 2. But apart from that, for Switzerland, if Yankovic doesn't play, you've got Andy Zakiri, who's got 11 goals in 13 appearances at under-21 level. He's at Brighton and Hove Albion. You've also got Filip Stojkovic as well. Maybe Noah Okafor at Red Bull Salzburg could be one to watch. And Dan Ndoye as well for Nice, OGC Nice, as a forward, age 20 with 4 goals and 9 appearances. So Switzerland maybe could be a bit of a dark horse in that Group D. You never know, but it's a tough group with Portugal there as well as England, and then Croatia as well. You can never rule out. So let's see. But in part 2 of this, we're going to wrap up part 1. That is quite a bumper part 1 with a lot of names for people in the Scouts notebook. In part 2 of this show, we're going to talk about the main contenders. So we're going to focus on France, that unbelievable French squad. We're going to talk about England. And we're going to talk about the Netherlands. Those are the 3 of the nations we're going to focus on in particular in detail, and talk a little bit more about Alexander's scouting background and what he looks for as well in players. So tune in part 2. Welcome to part 2 of this episode of the Just Football podcast, the Under-21 European Championships 2021 special. In part 1, we delved into sort of 25 names to keep an eye out for in this tournament, and discussed them in some depth, and also talks about Alexander's background in scouting. Alexander is the UK scout for Heerenveen. And in part 2, we're going to sort of touch on 3 of the favourites for this tournament. We did mention in that 25 to watch that we haven't picked any French players. And the reason for that is because they are worthy of a section of their own, because, as we say, this is probably one of the most stacked teams I think I've ever seen at under-21 level. So the first thing we're going to do is just briefly go through the names of this squad. So we've got Dimitri Boadu at Montpellier, Alban Lafont at Nantes, Ilan Meslier, of course, at Leeds United, who you'll know well, Alexander, Benoit Badiashile of Monaco, Colin Dagba, Paris Saint-Germain, Wesley Fofana at Leicester City, Pierre Kalulu at AC Milan, Ibrahima Konate at RB Leipzig, Jules Koundé at Sevilla, Fetou Mawassa at Stade Rennais, Adrien Truffert also of Stade Rennais, Hossein Ouar of Lyon, Eduardo Camavinga of Stade Rennais, Romain Favre of Brest, Matteo Guendouzi, of course, of Hertha Berlin on loan from Arsenal, Boubacar Kamara of Marseille, Boubakary Samare of Lille, Aurélien Tchouameni at Monaco, Moussa Diaby of Bayer Leverkusen, Odsonne Edouard of Celtic, Amine Gouiri of Nice, Jonathan Ikone of Lille, and finally Randall Kolo Muani at Nantes. Now, collectively between them, they already have well over 300 appearances at senior level in that squad. Now, I mean, Alexander, from your point of view, you know, what was your thoughts of this French squad when it was announced?
I think, like everybody else, it was just wow. I mean, if you just took this squad alone, it probably qualifies for a World Cup and goes into the knockout round. It's just absolutely outrageous. I mean, the big question that I was thinking is, who gets the start? Who gets the start for them? I mean, you could argue for every single player in the squad to start, which is absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, of course, in the past, for those who may not know, I've worked in French football as an analyst, so I do have a strong fondness for Liga, and I keep in touch with it as much as I can. I can try and sort of talk about this squad. We're going to talk about the sort of squad quality, their chances of winning the tournament, and that kind of thing. And of course, at France at under-20 level and under-21 level have a proud history. Of course, who can forget the team of 2013 that won the under-20 World Cup with Paul Pogba in it and others. And of course, France are going to be, they are the favourites, and for a reason. We'll go through the squad, and we'll just sort of briefly touch on players and how we probably could see the lineup being shaped. So of course, you've got Ilham Meslier and Alban Lafont fighting for maybe that number one spot. I think Lafont might take it. He is, of course, extremely highly rated. He's come through in the past. He started his career at Toulouse and played nearly 100 appearances for them. So when I say well over 300 games, we're talking actually, to be honest, way more than 300 games. They're combined in this team. There's just a ridiculous amount of appearances. So he's already made nearly 200 appearances in his career, Lafont. He moved to Fiorentina, and he's now on loan at Nantes. Really good sort of shot stopper. He has been talked about for so long. He broke into the team as a teenager at Toulouse. He's been in that first team for a good sort of 5 years, and really has a lot of ability. And is starting to, he's still got a lot of elements of his game to work on and to iron out. But as a 22-year-old, he's already got a strong base in terms of his experience. Ilham Meslier is someone you'll know from Leeds United, who will obviously challenge him. And you've been impressed with Meslier, haven't you, at Leeds so far?
I mean, I don't think you can not be impressed by what he's done in terms of it's his first Premier League season at such a young age, and he only made his Leeds debut really, was it the January of last year in the FA Cup against Arsenal? And yeah, he's been saving Leeds left, right and centre this season. I mean, everyone talks about how open they are as a team, but I think the people forget is in probably the last couple of months, the defensive record's actually been very strong, and a big part of that has been down to Ilham Meslier. I mean, it's just been absolutely outstanding. The other day against Fulham, there was one shot when it was at 1-0. I still don't know how he's managed to get his wrist on it. It was an absolutely tremendous save, and he's somebody I think who everybody's going to be talking about. And I think, like I say, I don't think he's going to start. Is my gut feeling this one? If you look at the previous squads and things, it probably is going to be Alban Lafont. But I think everyone can see that Meslier is going to go on to do some unbelievable things in the game. He's an absolutely tremendous goalkeeper.
Yeah, I mean, and then when you look at the defense, you've got 6'4" Benoit Badiashile. Now, this is a real talent who, there's been a lot of talk about potentially with Dayot Upamecano moving to Bayern Munich. There's been talk about Badiashile maybe being a potential one for sort of RB Leipzig to pick up. It's not quite happened. They've signed Mohamed Simakan, so I'm not sure that will really be a goer. But at AS Monaco, Benoit Badiashile, 19 years old. Again, this is a player who's played a lot of games already. He's a regular in that Ligue 1 team at Monaco. 29 appearances this season, 2 goals, one assist. As I say, is a man mountain really as a 19-year-old. Came through the youth system. He's a player who he does have elements of his game to work on, and nobody at this level is really going to be the finished article. I don't think, Alexander, you probably agree with that as well. You've still got elements of your game to work on. On the ball at times he can be a little bit erratic in his passing on occasions, and also defensively, positionally, maybe has some elements of his game to work on. But 65 appearances in Liga, again, it's a really strong base from which to work as a 19-year-old player. And 87 appearances in total for Monaco. It's really, again, a fantastic sort of grounding as a player. Is he a player that's caught your eye at all, or is he one you've seen much of?
I saw a little bit of him probably 2-3 years ago when he was in the Monaco youth teams in the UEFA Youth League, and everybody was thinking then he was ready then. I mean, he was just so dominant in his performances. And like I say, he just seems to be around for so long now. And it just amazes me that he's still the age he is and the amount of performances he has. And we're still talking about him. Is he going to start? Is he not going to start in this under-21s team? It's not a negative thing for Badiashile. It's a case of how tremendous this French squad is.
Yeah, it's outrageous, and of course, in defence, he probably will be expecting to start maybe as a heart of that centre back partnership, but he's got other players he can compete with, and you've only got to look at Colin Dagba, of course, hasn't quite maybe made it at PSG yet, but he is integrated into that squad. He's a right back with some ability, 22 years old. You've then got Wesley Fofana, who's made a multi-million-pound move to Leicester City, and has probably been one of the young players of the season, you could argue, in the Premier League, which shows the level he's at, and sort of is a testament to Leicester City's sort of scouting ability. Again, came from Saint-Etienne this season, and he's someone who he doesn't have a huge amount of appearances. Ibrahimovic Konate is probably the one who may be expected to play as a centre-back, and he is at Leipzig, of course. But yeah, I mean, Fofana's just got so much ability at Leicester. I'm sure many have seen him already. One to keep an eye out for. Konate, one to keep an eye out for as well. 21-year-old at RB Leipzig. Probably will come into the fore more regularly now with Upamecano leaving. He did have a bit of an injury situation and has kind of lost his place in the side at times at Leipzig. But again, a really strong defensive player who has a high ceiling, in my opinion. Then you've got Jules Koundé. Now, Koundé, as far as I'm concerned, is probably, if not the most exciting defensive player in European football at this moment in time, then certainly one of them. 22 years old now at Sevilla. He's obviously won the Europa League. He has a strong track record. He's already been linked with Real Madrid, Manchester United as well. Rumours of them scouting him. Koundé is a real class act. Is a Rolls Royce of a defender. Strong, good in the air. Good pass of the ball, can bring the ball out of play. So it's a testament to Sevilla's scouting. They picked him up from Bordeaux, where he sort of showed early promise, and signed him for quite a hefty fee, 25 million euros. And then he's just gone on from there and really started to impress. But again, he's not got a huge amount of caps, so it's another one where you're looking at it and saying in terms of under-21. So it's another one where you're looking at it and saying, will he even make the team? Which is really quite ridiculous, to be honest. Considering his ability, he's already probably good enough for the French national team, let alone under-21s. But we'll see. We'll see where he goes there. You've also then got Kalulu. Maybe at Milan hasn't quite made his mark, so I wouldn't expect him to be in there. The two Rennes players, Mouassa and Truffert. Mouassa's had a sort of difficult time of things with injuries. He was really good last season. And then an injury kept him out for quite a long spell at the beginning of this season, and he kind of lost his place in that Rennes side. Truffert has come in as well and been impressive. So we'll see who's selected as a left back. You've also got Romain Favre, who can do a job, and is at Brest and is a real player with people talk a lot about. Now in midfield, you've got Hossan Mouar, who has been strongly linked with Arsenal. 22 years old, 16 appearances, 4 goals at under-21 level. And then you've got Eduardo Camavinga as well, who's already, one of the youngest players to ever play for the French senior team. He'll come into the under-21s, and he could be again one of the standout players of the tournament. Hasn't quite had the season that he's had last season, and then in previous seasons. Obviously, he's been in that Rennes team since he was 16, and strongly rumoured that Real Madrid are really strongly looking at him. This season's been a little bit not quite as good, but the ability is certainly there. Left-footed player, can sort of progress the play. Really good midfield player. Can create, he can defend, he can get back, he can cover ground. One of my favourite players to watch at this moment in time. You've obviously got Guendouzi at Arsenal, Hertha Berlin, who's going to want to make an impact. He's their number 10 for this tournament. You've got Boubacar Kamara at Marseille, who's a strong player. Samare at Lille, strong player. Aurélien Tchouameni has been one of the standout players of this season in Liga. Really coming into his own in that Monaco side. Where do you begin with this squad? Such a good team. Then you've got Moussa Diaby, of course, who's at Leverkusen, and has done really well in that front three at Leverkusen. Alton Edouard has 10 games, 15 goals at under-21 level. Been excelling for Celtic for many years now. Probably good enough to move on from that league at some point. And then the talk of the town is where we'll follow. We'll end this section of France because we could talk about all their players all day long, to be honest. Is Gouiri. Now, he is the player of the moment in France. Do you know much about Gouiri, Alexander?
I can't say I've watched a lot of him personally, no.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about him because he's certainly one that I think he could be the standout player of the tournament again. He's done fantastically well in Ligue 1 this season. Third in the league for expected goals, 13.53. He's scored a lot of goals and he's also grabbing assists. He's a player who, recently in a win against Marseille, he was a standout player. He's become really that key figurehead of that Nice side already at such a young age. Strongly linked with moves to bigger clubs, as always in Ligue 1 when players start to do well. But yeah, he is a player that I really, really love watching. A forward player. He's one of those players who's come through the academy at Lyon, but didn't quite make the grade. You've also got Ryan Cherkey, and you've got one or two other players who didn't quite. Cherkey's still at Lyon, of course, but you've got one or two other players who sort of came through the academy and left. And Gouiri's one that Lyon may end up regretting letting go. 10 goals in 26 games for Nice so far. He's come through every single age group at France youth level, and really he is a top player, I think, in terms of his potential and where he could go. So I think Gouiri is one certainly to keep an eye out for in this tournament, and one that I strongly recommend people watch. So that sort of covers the French squad. It's really, really hard to, as I say, pick a player. Gouiri is that spark in that Nice team. Nice have really struggled in recent seasons. Obviously, Patrick Vieira was there and lost his job. But Gouiri is that shining light in that Nice squad and is already performing to a high level in Liga. So, yeah, rightly favourites France, and certainly I think they could probably go all the way. Would you agree, Alexander? Do you think anyone could maybe stop them?
I think it's going to take a lot for anybody to get in the way of them. There's certainly got to be thinking if they don't make it to a minimum of the semi-finals, it's a huge failure, and I think they'll be hoping the final is the minimum.
Yeah, 100%. And, in terms of teams that could potentially stop them, let's move on to England, because the three lions will be there and they've got a pretty good looking squad. And the biggest challenge we had when we were talking about this pre-show, Alexander, was trying to figure out exactly what sort of team England are going to play. And I've asked you to sort of look at how you would approach things and which players will stand out for you. So tell us, what you think of this England setup, which players stand out for you, and which ones maybe you've scouted as well. And, many of them will have come through Premier League 2 level. Which players have you seen evolve and grow?
Yeah, like you say, when we were looking beforehand, it was a case of this England team in the qualifiers and things, they played sometimes the 3-5-2 in a similar formation to like the seniors do. Then also they played this 4-3-3. So it was a case of which they're going to go with in this tournament. I don't think anybody knows apart from those within the camp. And a group of individuals-wise, it's absolutely tremendous. No one can doubt that. The talent speaks for itself. I mean, I'm just looking at some of the names here. I've got Callum Hudson-Odoi, you've got Curtis Jones, you've got Ryan Sessegnon, Mark Gouiri, Eddie Nketiah, Dwight McNeil. These are all top-level players already in their young careers, but it's how it comes together as a collective, and I think that mainly is going to come down to which formation they go with at the end of the day. And yeah, I've watched quite a lot of these players come through in the younger ages, and straight away you just go to Callum Hudson-Odoi. I mean, the kid is a talent. He's absolutely ridiculous. If you're picking one individual from this whole squad, not counting Mason Greenwood, who's pulled out just prior to the recording of this, Callum Hudson-Odoi is the one talent you would say, as soon as you saw him, you'd go, wow, he's something special. I mean, he just grabs games and wants to win them. He wants to make an impact. He's just frightening. I mean, I'm not sure where he plays in this team. Does he play as one of the strikers in the 3-5-2? Does he play as the right winger or left winger in the 4-3-3? I hope he plays as the left winger in a 4-3-3. Sorry, but with the players that are in the squad, I think if he's going to be playing out wide, he's probably going to be on the right-hand side now that Mason Greenwood's dropped out. So it's going to be interesting what happens with him. I mean, Eddie Nketiah is probably one of the most senior players in this team now. I'm not sure if he's already broken the record for under-21 goal scorers for England, but he's certainly going to be just about there now. And he's someone who, in his game time as well now, he's at Arsenal, he's just not getting a game. He's hardly making the squads at times now, and he's a goal scorer. That's what he does. I mean, his loan spell at Leeds, I'm sure he'd be the first to tell you he probably would have liked more game time. But at the same time, I'm sure he says the amount he learned off Marcelo Bielsa during his time there was absolutely ridiculous. And as soon as he took that back to Arsenal, he actually started off very strongly upon his return. But then he's dropped out ever since. I think the back line for England is actually potentially very strong. I mean, if we're going with the 3-5-2, just as an example, my lineup would be, it'll be Aaron Ramsdale in net, I think. I don't think that's much of a debate. Then if it's a 5 across the back, with including the wing backs, I've gone Max Aarons, Ben Wilmot, Ben Godfrey, Mark Gouiri, and Ryan Sessegnon. I mean, Max Aarons, he'll be a Premier League player again next year, whether that's with Norwich still or he moves on elsewhere. I mean, Ryan Sessegnon's been around since he was 16 and now, and he's doing okay in Hoffenheim. I'm sure he will be the first to say it could have gone better, but he's doing okay. He's progressing. Mark Gouiri, again, I think if Swansea don't go up, he will get another loan, and it will be to a Premier League club unless Chelsea fans see him getting involved. He is, for me, in terms of young defenders at a Premier League 2 and under-23 level, he was the definition of a Rolls-Royce defender. He was just so classy. I mean, he would glide across the pitch. He'd just stroll the ball so effortlessly. He just progressed everything in every team that he played in, and he was a leader in that team as well. And the senior man at the back is probably Ben Godfrey, who arguably, until the last probably 3-4 years, when he came through at Norwich massively, you wouldn't have put in this equation. But now I'm sure he'll be on Gareth Southgate's radar, potentially getting into the senior squad at some stage. Closely, for me personally, I think he's having a tremendous season at Everton. To say it's his first step up to a top 8 team in the country, I think, especially given that he's played a lot at right back, which isn't his position, he's a centre back. He's even played at left back a couple of times. I think he's a tremendous defender. I think he's highly underrated.
Of the players that you've scouted, because I'm sure you've probably seen a lot of these players live and followed them quite closely, which are the players that you can remember scouting that you first caught your eye and you would maybe say you saw at a very young age and you thought they would go on?
Like I say, Callum Hudson-Odoi was the immediate one that sprung out in terms of he was special from day dot when I saw him. Curtis Jones likewise was very special. Someone who people might not think necessarily was actually Oliver Skipp, who's now on loan at Norwich City. He's one of those he's just a lovely ball player. He's probably playing in the wrong nation to an extent. He's really developed his game now on loan at Norwich City in the Championship. But if you'd have looked at him maybe 2 years ago, you'd have said, oh, what a tremendous ball player. He'd have been that perfect regista, like we say in Italy. He's just a lovely ball player. But he needed someone alongside him to do more of the ball winning, whereas at Norwich, he's winning a lot of the ball now as well. And yeah, he's somebody I don't think people give enough attention to. And I'm sure Jose Mourinho's a big fan of him as well, from what I've read. And he obviously had him involved from as soon as he walked in the door there. But I expect him to be a Premier League player at some level next season. He's somebody I really, really do enjoy. And I think he's got a nice career ahead.
When you look at this England squad, there's a lot of young players. I think the average age is a little bit lower than a lot of the average ages of the other players in the squad. You've got the likes of Rhian Brewster, who's 20. Greenwood obviously pulled out, but he was 19. Hudson-Odoi is still 20. Noni Madueke, is someone we'll talk about in a minute, is 19. Dwight McNeil, 21, of course. Smith Rowe, 20. A lot of these players are quite young, aren't they? Jones, 20. Skip, 20. When they come through, Alexander, and you're scouting them, at what point do you sort of look at them and say, if you're scouting for Heerenveen as an example, and you're looking to maybe bring them across, to a foreign country, what attributes do you look for that could maybe suit the Eredivisie? And at what point do you, because Madueke obviously is playing at PSV Eindhoven, he's one who's made that move across. At what point do you, what profile does a player need to maybe move abroad versus maybe just developing through the youth system in England?
It's a really, really good question. I mean, in terms of from an Eredivisie perspective, if I get asked this question, I will always say to them, there's a huge emphasis on the 1v1 element in the Netherlands in general. So in terms of if it's a winger, I'll be looking predominantly at all their 1v1 actions, whether that's defensively, offensively, off the ball. Everything is how they deal 1v1. Likewise, a centre-back, likewise, a striker. There's a lot of times when people are isolated in those 1v1 moments. So it's very individual in that aspect. And the tempo is a little bit slower in the Netherlands than it is sometimes, even at Premier League 2 level. Because, I mean, if you watch the Manchester City under-23s, for example, they play the exact same brand as football the seniors do. So it's quick tempo, it's progressing quickly, it's building up through the thirds easily, it's fluid. Whereas in the Netherlands, there's a lot of recycling with the ball, there's a lot of patience, there's a lot of playing it from right back across the back four to the left back and going forward, and then the opportunity's not there, going back. And it's very methodical in its approach, generally speaking. So you've got to look at players who have that discipline, not just think, right, there's a gap there, I've got to go for it. It's a case of them thinking, right, it's the right moment, maybe I have got to make the pass back now. So it's a lot of maturity that you're looking for. So I see players who are 16 who have that maturity, but I also see players who are 21 who are fantastic talents but don't have the maturity. So it's a case of me having to go, right, weigh up the pros and cons for both and think, right, can our coaches do the job of getting that maturity level out of them? I mean, as a scout, my job is to identify the talent. That's the job. I'm not a coach. I can't say, right, go do this, do this, do this. I find the talent for them, then the rest is up to the coaches. And stereotypically, you would say Netherlands isn't as physical. I mean, I'm sure if you look at the majority of the defenders, they're not 6'4", 6'5", 6'6" giants and winning everything in the air. But there are some players that are like that. So it's not a case of none of them are like that. So, yeah, so in the Netherlands, they're looking for a lot more well-rounded personnel and how they work off the pitch and how they socialise with people. And especially with my club, because Heerenveen is quite out of the way in terms of the Netherlands in general, and it's only a small area in the country, so it's quite isolated. So there's a lot of the team coming together and doing activities outside of the game, and how they interact with the community. They'll go and hand out season tickets door to door. They'll go and do lots of community events and things. So there has to be a big element of the person in terms of how well they get on with people in general. So I don't necessarily know that from a British perspective, because like I say, I've never worked in a UK club to say how they'd necessarily assess that. But what I would say is the Netherlands will look for the progression of their own predominantly.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting to know. Great insight, to be honest. And yeah, let's move. I mean, one player that before we round off in terms of England, and I think England will be considered favourites. Of course, it's a big job at hand in terms of getting, winning the tournament for AD Boothroyd. But he's coming for, there's been differing opinions in terms of maybe his setup and how he sort of builds the side. But certainly he's got a huge amount of talent at his disposal. And one of the players that I'm going to briefly talk about now before we move on, which ties in with what you talked about in terms of the Netherlands, is, and I'm going to give him his full name here, Chukwunonso Tristan Madueke, a.k.a. Noni, 2002 born, player for PSV Eindhoven, is a player, for me, he's probably one of my favourite players to watch at this moment in time, along with Gouiri. I think if he can get into this England team, then he will be certainly one to watch. I think I know for a fact that Nigeria are sort of sniffing around him. So, potentially they may need to cap him as soon as they can, to be honest, Southgate, because this is a player who's doing fantastically well. I mean, I don't know how much you've seen him, Alexander, but in terms of style, this is a player who's pulling out no-look passes. He's jinking past men, a beautiful left foot. He's got 7 goals this season in 19 games for PSV, 6 assists. He can dribble. He's creating sort of 6 successful actions per 90 minutes. He can score from variety of positions, shots per 92.62, 48% of his shots on target, goal conversion percentage 28%. This is a player, who really is sort of just a well-rounded player as a forward. Maybe comparisons with Eberechi Eze in terms of maybe stylistically coming off a different position, but and he's like I say, he's got a really nice left foot on him, and I certainly think that he's averaging sort of nearly 8 dribbles per game, 57% success as well. So progressive runner, he can do a lot. This player, and I think he's certainly one to watch. And if he doesn't appear in this tournament, it'll be a bit of a shame, because he hasn't actually been capped for England under-21s. But certainly he has the ability. And can he get into the team ahead of the likes of Hudson-Odoi, Nketiah, Brewster, Dwight McNeil? Who knows? But certainly maybe one to look out for if you look for someone a little bit different in that England squad. Do you think England can go all the way, Alexander?
No, would be the straight and narrow, really. I mean, they've got the individuals to do it, and don't get me wrong, they could win it, theoretically speaking and hypothetically speaking. Sorry, I mean, they've got the ability to, but as a collective, and I don't have the most, what's the right way to put it here? I don't really have the biggest confidence in the coaching staff. I think, especially in qualifying, there was the games against Andorra and the 21s. I mean, some of the decisions that were made from the sidelines were absolutely terrible. And I don't think they know exactly how they're going to put all this team together, which could be the issue. And in the key moments, if they're drawing or if they're behind in the game, am I confident they'll make the right changes? Possibly not. But yeah, like just going back to your point about Nani Madueke, though, I mean, don't rule out the Netherlands coming in for him. I mean, the Dutch media recently have been pushing the question to him of would he be interested in representing the Netherlands? Because don't get me wrong, he can't qualify for them yet for a couple of years, but his performances are that impressive. The Dutch media are now pushing it on him in interviews, saying, in 2-3 years, when you qualify for a citizenship, would you be interested in playing for the senior team for the Netherlands? And obviously, it's a difficult one for him to answer at such a young age. But if he had Netherlands, Nigeria, and England to pick from, someone's got to get there first.
Yeah, and as someone with dual Nigerian English heritage, I'm certainly going to be a bit biased in my answer on that one. I think I know who I'd prefer him to play for, but yeah, no, you're right. He's going to have a lot of competition because he is like I say, a really, really exciting player. And that brings us on to our final team to discuss in this tournament. We're going to sort of maybe be a little bit harsh on Spain here because they do have a proud history in this competition. I've won it several times, but we're going to look at the Netherlands as a squad that we think are maybe our other favourites. And just a few other outsiders before we move on to the Netherlands to round this podcast off. You've got Iceland 80-1. Maybe if you were looking for a dark horse, you've got Czech Republic 50-1. You've got Denmark 25-1, who Alexander's pointed out as maybe potentially a dark horse as well. And then you've got the fifth favourites as Netherlands, fourth favourites are Germany, third favourites are England, second favourites Spain, and favourites are France. So maybe we're being a bit harsh on Germany and Spain here by not including them, but we're going to look at the Netherlands because the talent at their disposal. We talked about Koopmeiners in part one, and we're now going to move on to a couple of other players in this squad because this squad as well, I mean, it's not maybe quite French levels, but it's not too far away, is it? And, when you look at some of the players, I'm going to ask you about a couple of them, Alexander. You've got Per Schuurs at Ajax, who is a highly rated defender. Sven Botman as well at Lille, who I'm going to ask you about shortly. He's on our short list. You've got Justin Kluivert. Don't forget, he's done a lot. Still only 21. Is a player I scouted when he was at Netherlands under-16 level when he was coming through, and he was part of the team with Tahith Chong as well at Manchester United, and maybe not quite gone on. He's now at RB Leipzig, but certainly a player not without ability. Koopmeiners, as we say, is a standout in the Eredivisie at the moment. You've got Myron Boadu, who we're going to talk about in a minute. You've got Noah Lang as well, Cody Gakpo, Tyro Malacia, Jurgen Eklenkamp, Lucero Getruida. So it's another squad that's packed full of talent. Brian Brobby as well, who's just recently completed a move away from Ajax. A lot of ability in this squad, isn't it, Alexander?
Oh, I mean, in terms of a collective, I think this could possibly be the most rounded squad outside of France. I mean, it's just absolutely tremendous. And when you're looking at some of the individuals, like I say, Koopmeiners, he's been very disappointed not to be included in the seniors this time. But at the same time, you've got to understand he will be the focal point in this team at the under-21 level. And when you're talking about even some of the players who didn't make it or haven't been included, you're talking about Ryan Gravenberch, who's with the seniors, who's just exhausted this sort of level. It's that impressive of a group, really. And Brian Brobby, who's just agreed to go to RB Leipzig, is such an impressive young striker, and he's already scoring goals in the Europa League for Ajax and scoring goals regularly now in the Eredivisie. Probably is going to be second fiddle in this team. I mean, it's outstanding, and there's so many good individuals that I expect to get good moves, not just off the back of this tournament, but they should progress, generally speaking, because they are such exciting talents.
Tell me about Sven Botman.
Well, if you ask any Heerenveen fan, they affectionately called him Robotman because that's what he was. He was just a machine. If we didn't have him in our backline last year, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't have performed half as well as we did. He was just so dominant in the air. He was winning everything on the ground. His progression with the ball at his feet was tremendous. He was a big part of us getting Chidera Hajuke on the ball a lot. he was just so dominant. Like I say, at such a young age, and that was his first senior season in the Eredivisie as well. It was unbelievably impressive, and yeah, he's rightly got the move to Lille. The questions were being asked by a lot of general people saying, "Oh well, why aren't Ajax having a look at him?" Listen, tremendous player, but he just doesn't suit Ajax in his approach. He's not mobile enough. He's not the right player for Ajax. As unbelievably good as he is, it's just not the right fit. So I think the move to Lille was absolutely tremendous for him, and I think in the summer, with the issues in France, could he move on again? He's already having the links. I wouldn't put it again. I wouldn't say it won't happen. And I'm sure plenty of teams will be testing Lille's position on him to see how much they want for him and if he's available.
Yeah, and he spent the season on loan, didn't he, at Heerenveen, and was in fantastic form there. What kind of profile? I mean, do you think he could suit the Premier League? There's been a lot of rumours already. And what kind of stylistically, what kind of defender is he?
Yeah, I think he could certainly play in the Premier League. I think there's a lot of issues around his mobility. He doesn't turn the best, I would say. But I'm not saying he's horrendous. I'm not saying he turns like a double-decker bus or anything like that. I'm just saying it's an area he could improve on. He is quite stiff. And like I said, the nickname would imply robotman. He does move a bit stiff. But going backwards towards his own goal, has he got unbelievable pace? He's okay. It's nothing outstanding. It's nothing to be overly alarmed about. He could do better. But he's just such a solid defensive player in a team that will look to dominate with the ball, which is why I can understand the links to Liverpool. But you've got to ask the question, is he going to get ahead of a fit Virgil van Dijk in that left centre-back role? Probably not. So I think he would have to move to a very specific team for it to work out for him in the Premier League. I think I would prefer potentially for him to go the Bundesliga route, but will they pay the money that Lille might want? I don't know.
Yeah, really good insight there in terms of the technical side of it as well for defenders turning and that kind of thing. Just a few statistics. His passing accuracy this season for Lille is 89.6%. Long pass accuracy, 46%. He's averaging long passes per 90 at 6.82. Aerial duels won is 70%, and aerial duels per 90, 5.4. So certainly, defensive player who is standing out certainly in Lille. He's quickly integrated into that team in his first season and has become a regular one to watch. Now, I'm going to talk about Myron Boadu because, I think he could be one of the breakout players as well of this tournament. And certainly this could be, often with the European Championships, there's a couple of players who their performances could become a launch pad for them to move on to big things. Isn't it? If you look historically, there's been a lot of players who've kind of broken through at this level, and then the visibility they get from here, that their career goes on and kind of takes off to new levels. You can think of players, for example, in Spain's classic teams of the past, players like, maybe Isco, Asensio, players who've gone on and been really, really impressive. David De Gea, I remember watching Under-21 level, for example, Juan Mata, when he was young many, many years ago. And I think Boadu is one who he could go from sort of that periphery of people thinking about him as a player to watch to people really, really looking at him as a big player to watch. Now, personally, I first saw Boadu when he was at playing for AZ Alkmaar against Beko Häcken, which is a team in Sweden. They played in the Europa League qualifiers, and AZ Alkmaar dispatched Häcken pretty comfortably. And this player, Myron Boadu, he scored, I think, 2 goals, if I'm right in saying, and he put in one of the best performances I've seen in terms of the level. You could see he was just so far above Allsvenskan level in his acceleration, his sort of close control, his ability to beat players over 5 yards, his dribbling skills, his finishing, just a really bright sort of live wire player. He scored 1 goal, which was people sort of say a bit like Thierry Henry-like, in terms of that right foot finish coming onto it. And really from there, I've kind of followed this player ever since, and I think many have, to be honest. Born in 2001, he's 20 years old. He's got 12 goals in the Eredivisie this season. He's averaging 0.5 goals per 90, so sort of 1 in 2 man. 12 non-penalty goals, XG 9.58. He is a player who is a real live wire. I'm sure you would agree with me, Alexander. Yeah,
and I think something that really needs to be noted is how clever he is as well with his off the ball movements. I mean, especially in that AZ teams, a lot of the clever moves he makes is he makes those diagonal runs in behind the left back for the opposition, especially allowing Calvin Stengs to cut in and a lot of space in the centre then for him. And that could be a key area that Netherlands look to exploit. He connects the dots to his team so well, and I don't think he's just a player who looks to go in behind. He does look to link up the play with quick 1-2s from advanced midfielders, and especially with inverted wingers, he just knows the runs to make to allow them to have space to get a shot away. So he's the sort of player you wouldn't be looking at many others in his sort of levels to be possibly the tournament's top goal scorer.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I was going to say that actually he could be someone who could look to be the top scorer in this competition. Should probably get game time. I'd expect him to start, I think. But you've also got Brian Brobby up front, and you've got others like Ekelenkamp can play in forward areas, and so there's a lot of ability, isn't there? Noah Lang as well as one that you've highlighted, but Boadu are 6 in 6 for the under-21s, and certainly I think this could be. I believe he's represented by Mino Raiola potentially, which maybe he's going to be one of those sort of players on that roster along with Erling Haaland, who really could. This could be a breakout tournament for him, I think. So Netherlands, do you think they could go all the way, Alexander?
I would have them up there with France. Personally, obviously, I'm going to have some bias, but I would have them as my personal favourites to win the tournament. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how they fare against the teams who are of the quality of France. That's going to be their big test, and to see what sort of level some of these players are. But on paper, I'm going for Netherlands, to be honest.
There you go. And that's the reason we featured them as one of the teams to watch. I think they're going to be a very exciting watch. Noah Lang, someone I haven't seen too much of personally, but I'm going to be excited to see him and a few others. And just from my own personal point of view, this is probably my favourite youth tournament, I think, along with the Under-20 World Cup. Under-21 Euros has a strong fondness in my heart, especially at Just Football. We've covered it, as I say, in the past, attending tournaments. And I remember watching Harry Kane at that 2015 tournament, Jesse Lingard, of course. Sweden won it, and they had a lot of players who've gone on and had successful careers. And I think it's that borderline between, sometimes, for example, under-17s, it can be a bit too early, can't it, Alexander? You maybe don't quite, you get a lot of players who maybe can peak at that level and then maybe don't quite make it the senior level. But certainly this under-21 Euros, you really have the sort of cream of the crop, don't you, potentially?
Yeah, well, I think at that under-17 level, you've got to remember some of the players are physically just so dominant, and they're in the team primarily because of that, and the teams are looking to win the tournament. And some players who get to that sort of age overemphasize their physicality and neglect the technical side a little bit more. So sometimes you see players so dominant at 17 because they could just bully everybody at that age, and then as soon as they come up against someone at the under-21 level or the senior level, it's not as effective, and they regret then not putting as much emphasis onto the technical side of the game. Whereas at this under-21 level, you're looking at players from 15, 16 upwards who are playing, and they're all at a level playing field because a lot of these players are top level players and senior players now. So it's the gateway to the big leagues, so to speak. So yeah, it's a tournament I do personally enjoy a lot, and I would say there's probably on it from an enjoyment perspective only the Under-20 World Cup that I'd say is close, but I think in terms of just pure talent, this is an unbelievable tournament.
Yeah, and we'll leave it at that. I think for this podcast, it's been a bumper episode. Fantastic to get the insights of Alexander Wilkinson, and we've also had some insights into your scouting process as well, what you look for in players, how you assess players. So I hope this has provided value as well from a scouting point of view, and of course, wish you the best of success in your career and your time at Heerenveen. Hopefully, you can get out to some games in the coming weeks now that lockdowns are slowly starting to open up.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's been my pleasure. It's been a long time coming, like we said early on. And yeah, I'm sure as things start to open up now, I can get to games a lot more regularly live, and we can start to progress. And hopefully I get one or two of my players from my listing in this summer for the club. And I'm sure exciting things will happen for the club in the near future.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. And where can people find you if they wanted to sort of connect with you in the future? You want social media or anything like that?
Yeah, on social media, you can find me on Twitter at Xander0894, which is spelt with an X, not a Z, contrary to what other people may think. And yeah, so that's the main place you'll catch me if you wanted to message me, whether that's about advice or even if you just want to say, oh, what do you think of this player? Or I'm generally quite open. My DMs are there for anybody.
Yeah, really good to get you on the show, and I've been meaning to get you on for quite a long time. So I'm really happy that you've appeared on this podcast, and we will certainly keep in touch and maybe get you back on at some point in the future again too. So thanks so much for joining us. I hope this has provided some good insight into the Under-21 Euros. It's a really, really great competition. It will be, if you're in the UK, it's on, I believe Sky Sports on their YouTube channel, and they'll also be showing featured games on TV. I think the England games and that kind of thing, but also UEFA TV. So, certainly keep an eye out for it if you get the chance beginning this week. And of course, we'll be back for the latter stages of the tournament as well in May. And we'll pick it up and see where we are. So hopefully your scouting team notebook's full now with players to watch in this tournament. And of course, you've got some really good teams as well to watch. So we'll leave it there. You can find us on Twitter at JustFootball. You can find me on Twitter at JFFootball, JFFUTBOL, if you want to hit me up as well. And I hope, like I say, this has been a valuable insight into what's going to be a really exciting tournament. So thanks for following and for listening. We'll be back on the Just Football podcast. Subscribe on iTunes or on Spotify as well for regular episodes. And for this podcast, I will wish you good day and I hope you enjoy the tournament. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.